Hello, YouTube. So I was in Quito for a few days, and that's about all I can handle of Quito. I needed to get back out to the farm to do some work, so I'm back out here. I wanted to answer some questions and respond to some of the comments on my last video. That was my kind of 1 week update about the crisis in Ecuador. First, I'm going to show you around the farm a little bit because that's a lot more fun than talking about the crisis in Ecuador. I've been really successful this year at growing, I think it's called chayote. These are a squash that you stuff. You typically will stuff them with rice and meat or something like that. I didn't plant these. These were planted, first they were planted a year ago. They died off and then they just volunteered again and grew like crazy. I've got more of them than I really want, but they're all over the place. There's one of my, I think that is now a 3-year-old chard, 2 or 3 years old. Still pulling leaves off that chard. I don't have to plant them every year here. Some big old kale in the back there. Take a look at that. So I'm kicking around the farm and I'm thinking about some of the comments and questions I got. And one I got repeatedly was, why don't you just pack up and go back to the US? Which is a fair question, right? So like, I'm in Ecuador. Ecuador used to be one of the safest countries in Latin America, and now it's one of the most dangerous. And just this last week, it really kicked off, and the narcos declared war on the government declared war on the narcos, and all hell broke loose, right? So why don't I just pack up and go back to the US? And the answer is a little complicated. Part of it is, man, I was not happy in the US. To those of you living in the US, are you really happy? Do you have the free time you want? Do you get to spend your days out here working in the garden, working on the farm, or are you just working to survive? The most honest answer about why I don't go back to the US is I hated the rat race. I hated the rat race. There's a lot of wonderful things about the US. It's a great place to find relatively high paying jobs compared to the rest of the world. There's a lot of upward mobility. It doesn't feel like that when you're in the US. Feels like those days are over, but once you get out and you see the rest of the world, man, if you're born in Ecuador or, most of the developing world, there's very little upward mobility. Whatever social level you're born into, that's where you stay because you don't get the education you need. You just can't get ahead. There are exceptions. There's always exceptions, but even with all that upward mobility, the US for me was a place where I didn't feel like I could achieve what I wanted to. And yeah, if I were born in Ecuador, stuck in, this sort of system and making Ecuadorian wages, yeah, I'd want to go to the US. But being born in the US, taking advantage of everything I had there, and then moving to Ecuador, it's kind of a cheat code. It's kind of a cheat code for life. So I don't move back to the US because I don't want to, right? Like, I don't want to go back to the rat race. And I don't move back to the US because the visa situation for my family is difficult. I'm not going to go into great detail about it. I'll just say it's more complicated than most, and it's not a sure thing, and it's a really long, expensive process. So if we were going to move somewhere, it wouldn't be the US. It might be Colombia. It might be somewhere completely different. But that's why I don't pack up and move the family to the US. Look at those epic clouds behind me. I'm about to get some much needed rain. I think it hasn't rained out here in about 4 days while I was in Quito. It's really dry. So another question I got from a couple videos back At the very beginning of this crisis, video I put out where I talked about driving in Ecuador, and then also touched on the very beginning of the crisis, really before I knew how serious it was. Question of why, if it's so dangerous and difficult and stressful to drive here, why I drive. I like to explore. I like to drive. As stressful it is, as hectic as it can be, and as risky as it is, I like driving. I like these twisty, turny mountain roads. I like exploring. And I'm not real risk adverse. So just because it's risky doesn't mean I don't do it, right? And that's also kind of ties back into why I don't leave Ecuador. Yeah, there's some risk here, especially right now, but I'm not particularly risk adverse. Another question that really hit home was a few people asked why I was putting out videos like this, videos discussing the situation with the mafias, the narcos in Ecuador when I have kids, and basically implying that I'm putting them at risk. I don't feel that that's true. I don't think I'm on anyone's radar. I really don't think I don't think I'm saying anything that anyone important or anyone in the know on either side doesn't already know. And I think it would be silly to think that I would attract the attention and that there would be any reason for either side to be interested in me. I just don't see that as a reasonable fear. Hopefully I'm not wrong. That would suck, right? I'd feel incredibly terrible, but I just don't see that as being real. This is real life, not the movies. One thing that really surprised me was how many people reached out to me. Old friends that I'd worked with that were like, "Hey, you remember me from Antarctica or blah blah blah," and hey, let's go get a drink or something. Or people that reached out not on the YouTube comments, but actually tracked me down in other ways and wanted to chat with me. A couple people I didn't know took the time to have conversations with me, and I would say I learned a lot from those conversations. I think they were also reaching out to try to learn a thing or two from me. For what it's worth, I don't know that I'm really the best source for information, but I think there are some people that felt that my analysis of what was going on was better than a lot of the garbage that's out there, especially in the media. So one thing that came up with one person that reached out to me that I respect and I think knows a lot is that I probably put myself out there a little too much. There's people that have asked, what neighborhood I live in or where my farm is or things like that. And I'm not going to answer those questions because I do need to maintain a little bit of privacy and security. It's YouTube. There's weirdos out there. And another thing that came up, somebody contacted me and we had a long discussion. I'm not going to go into any sort of detail about who had contacted me, but it's someone that I think is really dialed into what is going on here and what might happen in the future. And somebody who is interested in that professionally. And their opinion about what the possible outcomes might be, what they said is it's probably going to look something like Mexico. They kind of corrected my comparisons to Venezuela because Venezuela really did begin in a very different method. That was not a narco war that turned into a socialist state. That was a socialist revolution that kind of morphed into a narco state, came around the other way around. So, but their opinion about the possible outcomes is that it's probable that this isn't, a quick battle against the narcos, and when it's done, it looks like El Salvador. That it's probably more of a Mexico sort of situation where the level of corruption throughout the government and society prevents a real win. Instead, it becomes using the government against this group and then using it against that group, and never really unwinding the relationship between the mafias, the cartels, and the government. It just evolving into something a little more stabilized than what it is right now. Is that true? I don't know. It's a guess. It's their guess based on a lot of information that they've gathered. I feel like it's probably a very educated guess, which is unfortunate. I was really hopeful that things would line up to make this something that, is very quick and we get through. It's not what I thought, but I was hopeful that it might be possible. One thing that I didn't really talk about in my last video, where I was kind of doing my predictions and analysis of the situation, that I meant to, this conflict between the cartels here in Ecuador and the state, this isn't a localized conflict. This is part of something a lot bigger. I've been taking some time to research and understand what has happened to other places, and particularly in Mexico. I've heard it described that there is a conflict between the East and the West, and that China, they learned from the Opium Wars, and they're kind of getting their revenge, right, with fentanyl. And in a way, they sort of use the cartel wars in Mexico and the drug trade as sort of a tire fire or a dumpster fire that they've lit underneath the U.S. Not that they really initiated it, but they sure jumped in when they saw opportunity. That is also true of Ecuador. China has been very influential in Ecuadorian politics and funding of Ecuadorian projects. China has a vested interest in Ecuador. They would love to see Ecuador stable enough that they can exploit resources, but also destabilized enough that they can exploit resources, right? So, and China has been influential in some of the, what I consider to be very likely more corrupt political parties here, like the Correistas. It's a kind of controversial thing to say. The Correistas are still powerful and they still have a lot of supporters, and it's kind of like Democrats versus Republicans in the US. There's no debate. There's just ideology and fanaticism and yelling at each other. So I'm sure I'll get some comments from Correistas. Yeah, whatever. But my opinion is that the fugitive ex-president hiding in Belgium was corrupt and was a huge part in what allowed the cartels to take root here. So because you have this sort of conservative versus liberal, East versus West thing going on, the leftist in South America, and you got to put American politics aside. Leftists in South America are nothing like leftists in the United States. The leftists in South America that are extremely authoritarian, but at least in their rhetoric support socialist policies, are the political party that has historically been more closely linked to cartels, closely linked to China and Russia and Venezuela and Cuba. really, it's more of the enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing, where these groups are kind of linked together because they have a common interest in destabilizing the U.S., whether it's destabilizing the U.S.'s ability to enforce their drug policy, or destabilizing the U.S. because it's part of a broader economic war, or destabilizing the U.S. because it is part of, positioning the chess pieces before who knows whatever is coming next. But there definitely does seem to be a lot of pieces in play right now, and a lot of things in motion on the global stage. And Ecuador is a part of that. The conflict between the narcos, the international support that the kind of conservative centrist government is receiving, and the support that various narco groups are receiving, is a part of a broader, geopolitical conflict. So I'm not qualified to really analyze that, but I do think I know enough to simply say that it is real, it is true. I'm not sure exactly, I've been asked why I was making videos about this topic at all, instead of, most of my videos are about what's going on the farm, or, various trips that I take, or overseas contracting. Why am I doing this analysis of the conflict in Ecuador? And it's the common thread with all my videos is I'm talking about, what's happening in my life right now. What's going on around me, and what's going on around me right now is this conflict in Ecuador. So to answer my eldest son's question about why I made the video, it's what's happening. This is what's going on in my life. I'm going to keep this video kind of short. I think that's all I had to say, other than to ask you guys if you've got questions for me, or if you've got anything to contribute, anything to add to the conversation. Please hit the comment down below and join the conversation. I appreciate it.